Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support in helping us reach 1,000 subscribers. We're now aiming for 2,000, so please support us by subscribing and helping us reach this milestone. Now let's start the story. Have you ever felt the sting of rejection when you needed help the most? Picture this. A blizzard rages outside, the air icy and unforgiving. You're shivering, your loyal service dog by your side, only to hear the harsh words, "No dogs allowed. Leave." That was David Harris's reality. A 42-year-old homeless veteran facing the coldest night Riverstone had seen in decades. Once a combat medic who served 3 brutal tours in Iraq, David's weathered face and silver-threaded hair hinted at struggles most couldn't imagine. Yet, there was still kindness in his hazel eyes, a reminder of the man who once saved lives under fire. 5 years ago, David was discharged, but his battle didn't end. PTSD brought nightmares, flashbacks, and panic attacks that tore his life apart. He lost his job, his savings ran dry, and last month, he was evicted from his tiny apartment. His lifeline was Talon, a German shepherd trained to detect his anxiety, apply calming pressure during flashbacks, and wake him from night terrors. Talon's vest, marked with service dog patches, represented their unbreakable bond. Riverstone was in the grip of its harshest winter storm in memory. Temperatures had plunged to a deadly 5 degrees Fahrenheit, with icy rain coating the streets. Another 14 inches of snow was expected by morning, turning the night into a death sentence for the city's homeless. The Riverstone Community Shelter, housed in a converted middle school gym, was a last refuge for many. Its director, Evelyn Clark, a stern woman in her late 50s, ran the facility with uncompromising rules: no alcohol, no drugs, no fighting, no pets. Across town, Mayor Ethan Bennett, a 39-year-old former Army captain and Riverstone's youngest mayor, worked late at City Hall. His campaign had been built on promises of better support for veterans and solutions to the growing homelessness crisis, a mission shaped by his own military service. As he led an emergency meeting about the storm, his aide, Samantha Miles, burst into the room, her face pale with urgency. "Sir, you need to see this. It's going viral," she said, thrusting her phone toward him. The grainy video showed David outside the shelter, Talon pressed against his leg as Evelyn pointed firmly at the no pet sign. "He's a service dog, not a pet." David's voice cracked with desperation. But Evelyn's response was icy. "Rules are rules. No exceptions." The timestamp showed the footage had been filmed just 20 minutes earlier. Mayor Bennett's jaw tightened, his heart sinking as he watched David and Talon disappear into the storm's brutal grasp. Imagine yourself in David's position, freezing, your faithful dog shivering beside you, and the last refuge slamming its door in your face. Would you keep searching, risking frostbite to protect Talon? Or would you swallow your pride and call an old friend for help? "Get my car. Now." Mayor Bennett's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He shoved his chair back, the screech of wood against tile echoing his rising fury. Grabbing his coat with a determination that silenced his team, he snapped, "Find out where they went." His staff sprang into action, their faces etched with the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a policy issue, it was a veteran's life hanging in the balance, threatened by a merciless storm. As a former Army captain, Mayor Bennett had seen men like David Harris endure the chaos of war, and the thought of one being abandoned now ignited a fire in his chest. He could almost smell the gunpowder of his past, feel the weight of a rifle in his hands, the memories pushing him to act. Meanwhile, David trudged through the relentless storm, each step a battle against the icy wind that cut through his threadbare military jacket like 1,000 tiny blades. Once a symbol of pride, the fabric now hung heavy and soaked, clinging uselessly to his trembling frame. His boots, waterlogged and leaden, squelched with every agonizing step, the cold seeping into his toes until they numbed into oblivion. His fingers, raw and red, burned with the early sting of frostbite, pain mingling with despair, gnawing at his spirit. Beside him, Talon whimpered softly, his thick fur matted with ice crystals that shimmered faintly under the streetlights. His warm breath formed fragile clouds in the frigid air, a stark contrast to the biting cold creeping in around them. Pressing against David's leg, Talon acted as both shield and anchor, sensing the rising panic pulsing through his master's veins. "We'll find somewhere, buddy," David whispered, his voice trembling, his teeth chattering. The words were a fragile lifeline, one he clung to with fading hope. Doubt stormed through his mind. Had they truly faced worse? 3 tours in Iraq flashed before him, the deafening roar of IEDs, the metallic tang of blood thick in the air, the fading screams of comrades lost in the dust. But this felt different. This was a war against indifference, a betrayal that cut deeper than the cold. His heart pounded with a mix of anger and exhaustion, each breath a painful reminder of how far he had fallen from the soldier he once was. Back at the Riverstone Community Shelter, Evelyn Clark processed new arrivals with the precision of a drill sergeant. The gym buzzed with the murmurs of desperate voices, the rustling of damp coats, but her demeanor remained unyielding. The no pets rule was her unwavering line, a barrier she had upheld for years to maintain order. "You should have left the dog at the pound if he wanted a bed," she muttered to her assistant, Claire. Claire, a young woman with hesitant eyes, shifted uncomfortably, her silence a quiet protest against the injustice she felt but dared not voice. Her hands twisted anxiously as she cast a fleeting glance at the floor, a silent witness to Evelyn's rigid stance. For Evelyn, order was everything. Years of managing the unpredictable tides of homelessness had shaped her into a fortress of discipline. Exceptions, to her, were dangerous cracks in the foundation, sanitation risks, allergy triggers, potential aggression, all reasons she recited like a mantra. But deep down, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. A small doubt she kept hiding behind her tough appearance. A worry she refused to face. Meanwhile, David found some shelter under a concrete. David huddled beneath the overpass, the structure offering only meager protection from the merciless wind that screamed through the gaps like a pack of vengeful wolves. The cold concrete pressed against his back, its unforgiving surface a sharp contrast to the warmth he so desperately craved. Dampness seeped into his skin, while ice pellets stung his exposed face, each one a tiny assault that left his skin raw and tender. The air smelled of wet earth and rusted metal, his shallow breaths puffing visibly in the frigid air, a fleeting sign of life amid the desolation. With trembling hands, he peeled off his soaked jacket, its fabric heavy with rainwater, and wrapped it around Talon's shivering body. The dog's eyes reflected a mix of gratitude and concern. Pulling Talon close, David felt the warmth of his companion seep into his chilled body, a fragile shield against the storm's relentless onslaught. His numb fingers fumbled with his phone, the screen's dim glow illuminating his frostbitten hands. 14% battery. A cruel taunt in his desperate search for salvation. As he scrolled through his contacts, his heart sank deeper with each name. Friends from the old days had drifted away, their lives moving forward while his spiraled into darkness. The weight of isolation pressed against him, heavier than the storm itself, a loneliness that echoed through the empty corridors of his mind. A missed call from his old squad leader, Tom Rivera, caught his eye like a beacon cutting through the gloom. Tom had reached out 3 months ago, his voice warm with concern over a crackling line, offering help with a sincerity that had pierced David's pride. Back then, David had refused, clinging to the belief he could rise on his own, a stubborn soldier's honor keeping him from asking for aid. Now, with hypothermia's icy grip tightening around him, that pride felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. His thumb hovered over the call button, his mind locked in a desperate conflict. Reach out and risk rejection, or stay silent and face the storm alone. Just as he pressed it, headlights pierced the darkness, sweeping across the overpass like a searchlight. David's heart leapt into his throat, his body instinctively shrinking back into the shadows. Encounters with police often ended badly for a homeless vet with a dog, handcuffs, barked orders, the sting of humiliation. Talon tensed beside him, a low growl rumbling from his chest, his hackles raised as he sensed David's anxiety. The air grew thick with suspense. Was this rescue or ruin? A black SUV rolled to a stop at the entrance of the overpass, its tires crunching against the icy ground with a sound that shattered the silence. The driver's door creaked open, and a figure stepped out, rain obscuring their features. Clad in an official city windbreaker that flapped wildly in the wind, they moved closer, boots splashing through the puddles. A voice cut through the howling storm. Firm, urgent. David Harris. Staff Sergeant Harris. The call jolted David, his military instincts sparking to life even as the cold numbed his limbs. He hesitated, his breath catching as he slowly rose to his feet, every muscle protesting the effort. "That's me," he replied, his voice steadying with the discipline drilled into him years ago. The rain parted like a curtain, revealing Mayor Ethan Bennett, a face David recognized from campaign posters, now standing before him, unbothered by the storm soaking his expensive suit. A vivid memory crashed over David as he stood at a dusty Iraqi checkpoint in 2012. The air had been thick with the acrid stench of smoke and gunpowder, the ground strewn with debris from a roadside bomb. His hands trembled as he bandaged a wounded soldier, blood staining his uniform, while his own breath came in ragged, panicked bursts. Chaos threatened to swallow him whole, screams echoing, the distant thud of artillery pounding through his skull, until Talon, Then a young pup with bright, alert eyes nudged against his leg. That steady pressure had anchored him, pulling him back from the brink of a breakdown and forging a bond that had carried him through war and now, perhaps, through this storm. The memory lingered, a bittersweet ache that steeled his resolve. "I'm sorry for what happened at the shelter," Mayor Bennett said, his voice heavy with regret as rain dripped from his brow. "That's not how Riverstone treats its heroes." David straightened, his posture snapping into place with the ingrained discipline of military training, his voice cold with the truth he'd endured. "With respect, sir, it seems that's exactly how Riverstone treats its veterans." The mayor didn't flinch, his gaze locking onto David's with an intensity that promised change. "You're right, and that changes tonight." The words hung between them, a vow that sparked a faint glimmer of hope in David's chest, though skepticism clung to him like a shadow. Back at the shelter, the gym fell into a stunned silence as Samantha Miles burst through the double doors, her boots leaving wet prints on the polished floor. Flanked by 2 city officials and a police officer, her presence commanded immediate attention. "Miss Clark," Samantha announced, her voice ringing with authority across the now quiet room. "By emergency order, Mayor Bennett has suspended the no pets policy for documented service animals at all city shelters." Evelyn's face flushed a deep crimson, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "He can't do that. There are health codes, regulations to consider," she protested, her voice rising with indignation. Samantha stepped forward, holding out an official document with a steady hand. "Actually, he can. The Americans with Disabilities Act mandates that service animals be accommodated in public facilities, including emergency shelters. This is the law, Ms. Clark." The police officer adjusted his stance, his presence reinforcing the weight of Samantha's words. "Ms. Clark, we're here to escort you to an emergency meeting with the mayor and city council," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Evelyn sputtered, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "What meeting? This is absurd. I have a shelter to run." Samantha held up her phone, the screen glowing with the viral video now nearing 75,000 views, the comments a torrent of outrage and support. "The meeting where you turned away a decorated veteran and his service dog in a deadly storm. The city know, the nation is watching." The weight of those words crashed over Evelyn, her staff exchanging uneasy glances that betrayed their own discomfort with her decision. Inside her, a storm of regret began to brew, a creeping realization that her rigid adherence to policy might have cost someone their life. Under the overpass, Mayor Bennett guided David into the SUV, his hands gentle but firm as he helped the shivering veteran to safety. His security team worked with care, lifting Talon into the back seat and draping a blanket over the dog to shield him from the cold. Their actions were a silent acknowledgement of the bond between man and dog. "Where are we going?" David asked. His voice was steady but tinged with weary curiosity, his eyes searching the mayor's face for any hint of deception. "First, to get you both warm and fed," Mayor Bennett replied, his tone firm but reassuring. "Then, we need to talk about veteran services in this city. A conversation that's been overdue for far too long." As the SUV's engine rumbled to life and pulled away, a small crowd gathered at a distance, their phones raised like lanterns in the dark, recording the moment destined to spark a national conversation. The headlights faded into the storm, leaving behind a trail of hope and unanswered questions. At City Hall, the lobby had been converted into a crisis center, a hive of activity buzzing with the urgency of the night. Medics stood ready with stacks of thermal blankets and steaming mugs of broth, their faces etched with concern. A veterinarian waited with specialized warming pads designed for service animals, her kit opened and prepared. David hesitated at the entrance, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of attention after months of being invisible to society. The bright lights and warm air felt foreign, a stark contrast to the cold shadows he had inhabited. Talon nudged his leg, his wet nose a steadying presence against the anxiety tightening David's chest. "It's okay," Mayor Bennett assured him, his voice a steady anchor. "No one here will separate you from Talon." A medic approached, her touch gentle as she draped a blanket over David's shoulders. The fabric's warmth seeped into his chilled skin, and she handed him a cup of broth, the steam rising to caress his face, a small comfort that brought tears to his eyes. The veterinarian knelt beside Talon, her voice soft and calm as she explained each step of her examination, checking his pulse, listening to his heartbeat. "He's in remarkable shape considering the conditions," she said, admiration evident in her tone. "He's been protecting you at his own expense." David's eyes glistened, his hand trembling as he stroked Talon's damp fur. "He always does," David murmured, tapping his temple with a shaky finger. "Out there, and in here, where the real battles are fought." The moment hung heavy, a testament to their unbreakable bond. Across town, the Riverstone Community Shelter had become a different kind of battlefield. News vans lined the street, their lights cutting through the storm as reporters braved the elements, microphones in hand, eager to capture the unfolding drama. Inside, Samantha Miles supervised the installation of new signs beside the outdated "No Pets" notice. Service animals welcome. It's federal law. Volunteers moved quickly, their actions purposeful and efficient, while Evelyn sat stiffly in her office, her defiance crumbling under the weight of the night's events. The sounds of hammering and the murmur of voices seeped through the walls, a symphony of change she could no longer ignore. When Samantha knocked and entered without waiting for permission, Evelyn bristled, her voice sharp. "The mayor wants me at City Hall in this storm. I have a shelter to run." Samantha's expression remained calm, though a flicker of disapproval shadowed her eyes. "Your assistant Claire will manage in your absence. A police escort is waiting to take you safely. And I should inform you the city attorney is reviewing potential violations of the ADA. The penalties could be severe, Miss Clark." The words struck like a blow, stirring a storm of regret and fear deep within Evelyn's chest. She stared at the viral video on Samantha's phone, David's pleading face seared into her mind, a haunting reflection of the compassion she had long suppressed. At City Hall, Mayor Bennett called an emergency press conference. The room buzzed with the hum of cameras, the rustle of notebooks, and the glare of bright lights. Standing beside him were David and Talon, both now clean and dry. Talon sported a new service vest, embroidered with a symbol of resilience. "What happened tonight was unacceptable," the mayor began, his voice laced with controlled anger that resonated through the hall. Staff Sergeant David Harris served this country through 3 tours, saving countless lives under fire. When he needed us, our system failed him in the cruelest way. The cameras captured David's stoic expression, his military discipline unwavering despite the hardship he had endured. At his side, Talon sat at perfect attention, the very image of a trained service animal, a silent but powerful rebuke of the injustice they had faced. Effective immediately, Mayor Bennett continued, his tone unwavering. "I am launching a veteran housing initiative to provide immediate shelter for any homeless veteran in Riverstone, with explicit accommodations for service animals." The room erupted in applause, a wave of support that sent a flicker of warmth through David's chest, though he kept his gaze steady, uncertain of what the future held. "I am also ordering a comprehensive review of all city shelter policies," the mayor added, his voice firm with resolve, "to ensure full compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act and veterans' rights." As he spoke, the doors at the back of the hall swung open. Evelyn Clark entered, flanked by 2 police officers. Her face was flushed with embarrassment, her steps hesitant as all eyes turned toward her. "Miss Clark," the mayor acknowledged, his tone cool. "Perfect timing." The cameras swiveled, their shutters clicking in rapid succession, capturing her uncomfortable approach like a relentless drumbeat. "Miss Clark made a decision tonight." Mayor Bennett addressed the audience, his words deliberate. "A decision that nearly cost a veteran his life, and certainly cost him his dignity." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice unsteady under the weight of her actions. "Our policies exist for health and safety reasons. Outdated policies that violate federal law." The mayor interrupted, his gaze sharp. "Policies that, as shelter director, you were responsible for reviewing and updating." Tension thickened the air, a heavy cloud of judgment and expectation. David watched the exchange with a swirl of emotions, anger at the system that had failed him, empathy for Evelyn's precarious position, and a lingering fear of how fragile his own stability remained. He knew all too well the sting of losing a job, the slow descent into invisibility. His mind drifted to the memory of his last paycheck, the moment his independence was stripped away, and the long months of hunger that followed. Then, unexpectedly, the doors opened again. A group of uniformed veterans from the local Veterans of Valor post entered, their boots striking the floor with measured precision. At the front stood Captain Liana Torres, her captain's bars gleaming under the overhead lights. She approached with the crisp authority that reminded David of his old unit. She stopped before him and saluted, the gesture sending a surge of long-buried pride through his weary frame. "Staff Sergeant Harris," she said, her voice rich with respect. "Captain Torres, VOV Post 1882. We're here to ensure you and Talon receive the support you've earned." David returned the salute, his throat tightening with emotion. It had been years since anyone had acknowledged his service with such respect, the gesture a bridge back to the man he once was. Tears pricked his eyes, but he blinked them away, the weight of their support anchoring him. Captain Torres turned to face Mayor Bennett and Evelyn, her stance unwavering. "The veteran community is watching this situation closely, and we expect accountability. Full and immediate. Mayor Bennett nodded solemnly, his expression set with determination. There will be accountability. As cameras flashed, capturing the moment in bursts of light, David felt Talon press against his leg, not an alert, but a gentle reassurance that steadied his racing heart. For the first time in months, a fragile hope began to grow within him, a seedling breaking through the barren soil of despair. In Mayor Bennett's private office, away from the relentless glare of the press, Captain Torres and two other veterans formed a protective circle around David. The room was warm, the scent of coffee mingling with the dampness of wet coats, a sharp contrast to the storm still raging outside. Talon lay at David's feet, his head resting on David's shoe, a silent guardian amid the unfolding drama. The mayor closed the door with a decisive click, signaling the conversation's confidentiality. "There's something you should know," Mayor Bennett began, gesturing for David to sit in a plush chair that felt unfamiliar against his weary body. "This situation has exposed something much bigger than one shelter director's poor judgment." He opened a folder, the rustling of papers a forewarning of deeper revelations. "After tonight, I had my staff pull records from all 5 emergency shelters in the city. In the past year alone, 47 veterans with service animals have been turned away. And those are just the documented cases." Captain Torres cursed under her breath, the words snapping through the room like a gunshot. "That's criminal," she said, fists clenched at her sides. "It gets worse," the mayor continued, his voice dropping to a grim undertone. 3 years ago, the city received a $2.5 million federal grant specifically for accommodating veterans with service animals. That money didn't go where it was intended. David's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as anger surged through him. "Where did it go?" he demanded, his voice low but fierce. "That's what we intend to find out," Mayor Bennett replied, his eyes locking onto David's with a promise of justice. "Because it certainly didn't go towards service animal accommodations or veteran-specific resources." The revelation settled over them like a heavy cloud of betrayal, thickening the air with anger and disbelief. Samantha Miles entered the room, her footsteps quick and deliberate, her expression urgent as she carried a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, placing the device on the desk with a decisive tap. The screen glowed with the viral video, now surpassing 1.2 million views. Comments scrolled rapidly, a torrent of outrage, empathy, and solidarity. But it was something else that caught their attention, a new and troubling pattern. Dozens of veterans from across the country were sharing their own stories. Each one mirrored David's pain accounts of shelters turning away veterans because of their service animals. "This isn't just Riverstone," Samantha said, her voice trembling with the weight of the discovery. "This is happening everywhere." David stared at the screen, slowly realizing the truth. His story wasn't just his own anymore. "This isn't just about me anymore, is it?" David murmured, his voice trembling. "No," Mayor Bennett agreed, his tone firm and resolute. "It's about exposing a systemic failure in how this country treats its veterans." Captain Torres leaned forward, her eyes bright with determination. "Staff Sergeant, with your permission, the VOV would like to make you the face of a national campaign to address this issue. Your story could drive real change." David hesitated, discomfort prickling his skin at the thought of being thrust into the spotlight. "I'm not sure I'm the right person," he admitted, his voice thick with uncertainty. "I'm just trying to survive day by day, moment by moment." The room fell silent, his humility a stark contrast to the monumental task now before him. The door opened abruptly, the suddenness jolting the tense atmosphere. Evelyn Clark entered, her earlier defiance replaced by a pale, shaken expression. Her hands twisted nervously at her sides. "I need to speak with all of you," she said, her voice brittle and fragile. "Especially you, Sergeant Harris." Mayor Bennett straightened, his posture rigid. "Miss Clark, this is a private meeting. Please," she insisted, her eyes pleading. "What I have to say changes everything." David regarded her for a long moment, the memory of her cold dismissal flashing through his mind. But he nodded. "Let her speak." Evelyn approached cautiously, maintaining a respectful distance from Talon. Her movements were tentative, as if she feared judgment. "I was told to enforce the no pets policy strictly, especially for service animals," she began, her voice cracking. "I was specifically instructed to document any incidents as voluntary departures rather than denials of service." "Instructed by whom?" Mayor Bennett demanded, his tone sharp and suspicious. "City Housing Director Noah Clark," she replied, her gaze falling to the floor. Samantha's eyes widened in recognition. "Noah oversees all federal grants related to housing and homelessness in Riverstone. A position of trust, now tainted by suspicion." "There's more," Evelyn continued, her voice gathering a shaky strength as she unburdened herself. "3 months ago, I questioned the policy after turning away a veteran in a wheelchair with a service dog. His pleas still echo in my mind. Please, she's all I have. Director Clark told me that accommodating service animals would cut into the budget and that I should prioritize quantity over special needs. I followed orders, believing it was for the greater good. But the guilt has haunted me ever since. David's fists tightened with anger. Having a service dog isn't special, it's something I need to survive, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. I know that now, Evelyn admitted, her eyes glistening with tears she hadn't yet shed. I should have known it then. I've spent the last hour reviewing the ADA guidelines, and I see now how wrong I was. I'm prepared to resign, to step aside and let someone better take my place. A tense silence filled the room as Evelyn's confession lingered in the air. Mayor Bennett watched her, his face giving nothing away. Resignation is the easy way out, Miss Clark, he said, his voice measured and calm. But I have something else in mind. He turned to David, his eyes searching for approval. What if instead of just exposing the problem, we build a solution? Mayor Bennett proposed, his eyes alight with purpose. A dedicated veteran shelter here in Riverstone, a national model for accommodating service animals. With what funding? Captain Torres asked, her skepticism a practical challenge to the mayor's ambitious vision. The $2.5 million in misappropriated grant money. For starters, Mayor Bennett replied, his tone confident. And I believe the public response to this situation will inspire substantial private donations. When people see injustice, they want to help make it right. He looked at Evelyn, his gaze softening slightly. I think Miss Clark should help build it. Not as a shelter director, but as someone committed to learning from her mistakes and helping to repair a broken system. The unexpected suggestion left the room silent, surprise rippling through the group. David glanced down at Talon, whose steady gaze met his with unwavering loyalty. How many veterans depended on bonds like theirs, forced to choose between shelter and the companion that kept their darkness at bay? The question gnawed at him, a call to action he couldn't ignore. If I do this, David said slowly, his voice gaining strength with each word, if I become the face of this campaign, I need guarantees. Not just promises for the future, but real, immediate action for veterans out there tonight, facing the same storm I did. Mayor Bennett nodded, his expression resolute. Name your terms, Sergeant. For starters, David replied, his tone firm. Every hotel in Riverstone with empty rooms tonight needs to open their doors to homeless veterans and their service animals on the city's dime. And I want a concrete plan to ensure no one else is turned away like I was. The room buzzed with energy, a sense of possibility igniting a new chapter born from the darkness of the storm. 6 months later, the Riverstone Veterans Haven opened its doors, a beacon of hope built from that fateful night. The former community center had been transformed into a state-of-the-art facility for homeless veterans, its walls echoing with dignity and care. Dormitory rooms with dedicated service animal areas, an on-site veterinary clinic, and comprehensive support for PTSD and other conditions reflected a commitment to healing. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd that spilled onto the surrounding streets, their cheers a testament to the journey that had brought them here. David stood near the podium, Talon at his side, both a far cry from that desperate night beneath the overpass. Dressed in a sharp suit, his hair neatly trimmed, David's posture reflected the soldier he had always been, despite the struggles. Talon's new vest bore a patch that read Policy Change Hero, a symbol of their hard-won triumph. Mayor Bennett took the microphone, his voice steady and filled with pride. 6 months ago, a storm exposed a crisis in our city, one we had ignored for far too long. Today, we take a step toward fixing it. He gestured to David. None of this would have been possible without Staff Sergeant David Harris and Talon. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of support that washed over David, though he kept his gaze steady, humbled by the moment. Stepping forward, David spoke, his voice clear and resonant. That night, when I was turned away, I thought I'd hit rock bottom. The cold, the rejection, it felt like the end. I never imagined it would lead to this. He scanned the crowd, spotting Captain Torres, Samantha, and even Evelyn, now an advocate for policy reform. Her presence marked an unexpected but genuine redemption. This haven isn't just a building, David continued, his voice strong. It's a promise. No veteran should ever have to choose between shelter and the service animal that keeps their demons at bay. The wounds of war aren't always visible, and healing takes many forms: loyalty, community, and the courage to rise again. After his speech, David knelt beside Talon, his voice a whisper meant only for the dog's ears. We did it, buddy. Together. Talon licked his hand, a silent vow of loyalty that brought tears to David's eyes, a private moment of gratitude amidst public triumph. The haven's impact rippled far beyond Riverstone. 19 cities nationwide began similar projects, using the Riverstone model as their blueprint. A federal task force, spurred by the scandal, launched investigations into misused veteran funds, resulting in sweeping policy reforms and new accountability measures. David ended his speech by kneeling to Talon's level. "This guy saved me. Overseas in combat, and here at home in a different fight. Every veteran deserves to keep their lifeline." The crowd rose to a standing ovation, their applause a thunderous affirmation of his words. As David and Talon led the first tour, a bronze plaque at the entrance captured the essence of their victory. No veteran left outside. No service animal left behind. Noah Clark, the former housing director, had been fired and faced trial for embezzling funds, a case that sparked nationwide audits. Evelyn Clark, now dedicated to training shelter directors on ADA compliance, used her own mistakes as a powerful lesson. Her redemption became a quiet triumph of conscience. That evening, as the crowds dispersed, David walked Talon around the haven. The twilight cast a warm glow over the building's walls, the air rich with the scent of fresh paint and renewed hope, a stark contrast to the storm's bitterness. A young veteran approached, a Labrador service dog at his side, his eyes bright with gratitude. "Sergeant Harris, thank you. I've been sleeping in my car for months because no shelter would take us." David shook his hand, his grip steady and filled with understanding. "Not anymore. You're home now." The moment lingered, a passing of the torch from one survivor to another. Stories like David's aren't rare. Across the United States, nearly 40,000 veterans face homelessness, many relying on service animals to cope with PTSD, physical disabilities, and the unseen scars of war. Yet, discrimination persists. Just last month in Seattle, an Army veteran was denied shelter 3 times despite federal laws mandating accommodation. These gaps between our gratitude for veterans and our actions reveal a harsh truth. True respect lies in protecting their rights when they are most vulnerable. David's journey shows the power of standing up, even when you're at your lowest. Have you ever fought for someone or faced discrimination yourself? Share your story in the comments and tag #ServiceSheltered to join the movement David began. Your voice can inspire change and connect you with others who understand. David's story is proof that one person's courage can spark a revolution. Sometimes, standing alone in the rain is what it takes to unleash a downpour of change that reshapes a nation. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.